Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all witnesses coming before the committee today. My questions are directed at David, if I may. David, good to see you again. How does the Covenant currently support Commonwealth veterans and their families, and do you feel this bill will improve that?
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Stephen. I think the reality is that the Covenant would support Commonwealth veterans, but only if they gain citizenship, in which case they would be treated like any other veteran in the UK. And there lies the main problem, because very often it's very difficult and complicated for them to get citizenship. As we know, 7% of the armed forces come from a Commonwealth background. And the issues we see is with the complex visa applications and the costs. Very often these are the people that slip through the net, because the first thing that they're asked if they go for a job is, do you have the right to work in the UK? If they go for medical treatment, they're very often put off because of the costs of the NHS, because they're not classed as citizenships, as we've seen with recent cases that have hit the press, where a veteran with a brain tumour was looking at costs of almost £30,000 to have treatment for a brain tumour, despite fighting in Iraq in two war zones. So I think the Covenant could go a lot further in protecting these veterans, and I think it's by and large missed out quite a wide collective of veterans in the way that it's been written. And I would like to see immigration added into the bill, because I think that's a very important point that's been missed.
Thank you for that. And can you give some sort of specific examples of how the Commonwealth visa fees have impacted on veterans that you're aware of?
Yeah, I mean, sadly, I could speak to you all day about this, and I appreciate we are pushed for time. But if I give you a couple of cases to highlight the point, we have a Commonwealth veteran who served in Germany, was brought back to the UK, and 12 months later was made redundant or told that his services were no longer required. He went to the local council to help with housing, because he was kicked out of army accommodation, and he was told that they couldn't help because he had no long-term connection with the area. So he was then forced to live in his car in Tesco's with his wife and two children, effectively living on handouts from Tesco staff who took pity on him, which is a really disgraceful story, and quite a blot on us as a country, that any veteran should be in that position. We also have ones that, unfortunately, because of the visa fees, have had to return back to their country of origin, where very often mental health services aren't to the level that they are in the UK. So again, if we take Fiji as an example, there is one hospital that specialises in mental health, which at times can be nearly a 4-hour drive away from people if they're at the opposite end of the island. So we have an example of a veteran who is effectively living in what can only be described as a chicken shed, so a corrugated building. Half of it's been damaged by the recent storms out there, who is desperately in need of mental health treatment, but can't because it's so far away and transport links are so poor. Now that person should actually be in the UK and should be getting fixed and repaired by the country that effectively damaged him by sending him on operations.
Thank you for those really powerful examples. And with that in mind, do you think that the high visa fees amount to a breach of the covenant?
Absolutely, and I've been on record to say that I think the visa fees are completely wrong. It's not in the essence of the Armed Forces Covenant, which specifically says that it will give or understand that those who have served in the armed forces and their families should be treated with fairness and respect in the communities, economy, and society that they serve. And that definitely hasn't happened. To expect a family of four to spend nearly 10 grand to remain in the UK is unreasonable. The limits on earnings for bringing people in is disgraceful. So if we look at a recruit, they earn less than £16,000. A private earns just over £20,000. Now, to apply for a spouse to join you in the country, you have to earn at least 18,600. So that immediately rules out a recruit to have that family network. You then have to have £3,800 for your first child and an extra £2,400 for an additional child. So when we look at that, you would need to be a Lance Corporal to have your family and support network here in the UK with you. So it massively prices out Commonwealth soldiers who traditionally don't progress through the ranks as quickly as British-born nationals.
Based on your previous answers, David, you're suggesting that immigration should be a key part of this bill. What other actions do you think the government should take?
Yeah, I mean, I served in Afghanistan with Commonwealth soldiers, and I don't see, they fought alongside me in exactly the same way as British nationals, and I don't see why they should be treated any differently. So I think immigration needs to be brought in. I think the limits on bringing spouses and children in need to be scrapped for veterans. It's very important that we have that network. But yeah, primarily I think the answer seems to be that the suggestion is that credit unions will fill the gap, which isn't something that we've covered as yet. But when you look at small loans from them, we're talking 13% at times to cover the costs. But primarily that's just a plaster over the issue, and actually they shouldn't be charged these fees. So what I would like to see is the fees either scrapped or dramatically reduced. We've campaigned to ask for automatic indefinite leave to remain after 4 years and citizenship after 5 years. The fees have massively increased since they were introduced in 2003, from what was then £150 up to £2,389. There used to be another way of establishing a visa, which was over a longer period, where you could spend £1,500 every 2.5 years. The issue with that is the introduction of the health surcharge has made that route unrealistic. So the only route people are forced down now is indefinite leave to remain, and very often can't afford to do that. So some people are having to get second jobs if they want to bring family members over, or simply are just priced out of being able to stay in the UK.
Thank you for that, David. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr McMillan, your evidence is very persuasive. I just want to draw to your attention, please, and that of the wider panel, that this very issue is subject to consultation as we speak within both the Home Office and the MOD. And I'm sure that we'll be hearing more about it in due course.
Thank you, Chair. And just your final remarks there were very powerful, actually, to listen to. But in the 2 sessions prior to this, we were looking primarily at the service complaints system and the service justice system. So could you briefly, in the time we have left, tell the committee how these 2 systems impact the groups that you primarily work with? And who wants to go first?
Yeah, I don't mind coming in.
David?
Coming in. I think the complaint process, there are clear issues with it, and I think Commonwealth soldiers very often struggle to raise any objections because they have this issue hanging over them that if they are removed and they could potentially be sent home. So they always have that fear that if they put their head above the parapet and put in a complaint or raise a concern, then they are in a precarious situation with regards to their immigration status and visa requirements. So I feel that they're unfairly marginalised, with that system. And I think, having worked with disciplinary and grievances process in the civilian arena, I find the length of time that it takes for service redresses to go ahead is shocking. If that was in a civilian world, trade unions were jumping up and down, rightly so. So I think there is a lot of work to be done.
Thank you. Diane?
Yeah, I think because we've seen that bullying, assault, sexual issues have all, women are more proportionally represented in the service complaint system. So I think the problems of the complaint system are common to all, but women are particularly disproportionately represented. And I think we're let down and felt very much offended by the fact that Wigston report reviews, as I think Nicola Williams said, only 1 of 36 of the recommendations to tackle inappropriate behaviour has actually been enacted, and all others have been effectively shelved. So I think that's been felt to be a particular hurt for women.
Thank you. Caroline?
I think that LGBT plus personnel will probably be underrepresented in the service complaints process for all sorts of reasons, not least of which is probably quite common to most most veterans, in fact, most service personnel, is the fact of the worry that by complaining that you're seen as somebody who's not part of the unit, or your promotion prospects are going to be affected, or your posting is going to be affected, or you're going to be discriminated against for some reason. Subtly, it doesn't have to be something that's very obvious. And I think the service complaints is the tip of the iceberg, really. For all the complaints that we do see, there'll be lots and lots and lots that we don't. People don't get there, and therefore, I think the repair needs to be done before it gets to that. Before we get to the service complaints, we need to address all of the things that are causing the complaints.
Thank you. And Craig?
I think Caroline makes a really important point about a likelihood of underrepresentation for the LGBT plus community, not least because in that process there might be a perception of outing yourself. And there are some real challenges around that, and they need to be addressed. There is insufficient monitoring of LGBT plus personnel in the armed forces. Completely accept that there are challenges to that, but the fact that there are challenges doesn't mean that we don't try our absolute hardest. On JPA, it's our understanding that 29% of individuals have declared a sexual orientation. People have the choice on JPA as to whether they declare it or not, but it seems to me that it will be a good idea to encourage people to declare, or to create an environment in which people feel able to do that, because it will help us in the future find out what we don't know. So we support more monitoring.
Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. The prescribed question is about what do you think should be more or less, is there anything missing in the bill? But I'd also like to maybe ask one more kind of specific element to that. We talked about a values-led approach, the lived experience, and if you were a member of any other department of government, you would have a representative body which would be seeking agreement through organisation and cooperation with the heads of government. So can I ask all of you, do you think it's now about time that we follow the rest of our NATO allies, the vast majority of them, and have a formal, independent armed forces representative body in which the ranks can have a vocal and clear way of engaging with the MOD structure? Diane, can I come first to you?
Yes, and again, I'll keep my answer short, courtesy of the drilling. Absolutely, it's my main point, and I think it's a complete hole in the bill at the moment that we don't see the comment about an independent representative body. It was mentioned as a keystone part of the Wigston report, and CDS himself said he thought that due to the laddish culture and problems with leadership, that we should go further and make it, I think, fully independent. So absolutely, I think we need to move forward and enshrine this in the Armed Forces Bill and not wait another 5 years.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, absolutely. Although I'm here, obviously, as Citizenship for Soldiers, I do a lot of trade union work, so I see the benefits of advocacy and independent support for my members on a daily basis when I deal with cases. And I think to have an independent body is beneficial in two ways. I think it will help people when they do need advice and support, that they will be getting independent advice that they can trust, and will be primarily looking after their agenda. But also it allows for an independent feedback mechanism to feed back. Too often in the army, you see examples where a brigadier has flown in and a kind of lesson has already been drafted, and you answer the questions and everyone thinks that everything's going very well, and people are too scared to put their head above the parapet to raise concerns or injustices or wrongs. Whereas some kind of body would be independent and they could effectively raise it through there with anonymity. And I think that would be very beneficial to the armed forces to get a true perspective on what the issues are.
Thank you. Craig?
Having such a representative body is something that's been tried in many countries overseas with great success. And I think what we've heard this morning is that for individuals who are from minorities who have protected characteristics, there have been historic hurts, and there are ongoing situations, and some degree of independence and independent support would clearly be a benefit. So yes, we would support.
And Caroline, any final comments on that?
I agree, but I also think that any independent body should have lived experience within that body, so that each of the communities is properly represented.
Thank you.
Back. Very much, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. It's a fascinating session. My question's to everybody, but I don't mind who goes first. Should protected characteristics be included in the statutory guidance on applying due regard? So would Caroline, Diane, or like to come in on that, or Craig?
Yes, I think they should. There's no mention of protected characteristics, and it's not mentioned in the covenant at all. If you look at the covenant, there's no mention of diversity inclusion at all. And Fighting with Pride was delighted to work with SAFA earlier this year, late last year, and COBSIO, the Confederation of Service Organisations, to make a statement, an observation in the annual report to the Covenant to suggest that diversity and inclusion wasn't included, and there was no mention whatsoever of protected characteristics. And that's all very well and great. The Covenant is there as a promise for all people, all of the military family, that they deserve our respect and support and fair treatment. And it demonstrates the value of their contribution. But people can sign up to the Armed Forces Covenant and have that logo on their website saying that they support the Armed Forces Covenant. But actually, they may have values which differ to the modern military in terms of how they regard veterans who have protected characteristics. So I think it should be.
Yeah, Caroline, well, on that point, it leads me quite nicely into my next question. What metrics then could be used to measure how bodies take these characteristics into account when they are applying the Covenant?
There needs to be some kind of accountability for sure. So when organisations request or ask to be signed up to as signatories to the Covenant, then there should be some kind of look at that organisation on how it values veterans with protected characteristics, or all people with protected characteristics. And that should be part of the process of allowing an organisation to sign up to say it is a member of the Armed Forces Covenant.
Okay, thank you. And David, I can see you nodding there. Have you got anything to add from your perspective?
Absolutely, I completely share my fellow panel members' views. You know, fighting discrimination should be at a foundation of anything we do in any organisation, but especially the armed forces. And that you know, across the board with all the protected characteristics, we should be doing our utmost to stamp out any sort of discrimination. And we've heard from other panel members today about you know, the issues with sexual assaults and things like that, and that really has no place in the armed forces.
Okay, and Diane?
I'm going to keep my answers short. I've moved rooms, but they're drilling. They've decided to drill on the road right outside, so I apologise. So, yeah, absolutely. I think women feel the same too. They often feel invisible, particularly in the veterans sector, and therefore I believe that the protected characteristics do need to be enshrined in the system.
Thank you. And Craig, don't want to leave you out.
Thank you. I can only agree. The values that we expect for our veterans and the organisations that support them need to be the values of our modern day armed forces, and we can only do that if we include protected characteristics.
Okay, if I may, I'll ask one myself. Could I ask all the witnesses, please, if you feel that the MOD has come a long way in tackling diversity and inclusion, and that your views on whether it's now a fair employer? Craig first, please.
Yeah, I'll happily take that question whilst it's quiet outside. I believe that progress has stalled, and actually, although we have diversity and inclusion on paper, that we don't actually have it in reality. And that's my concern, and why I stepped forward is I think we're perhaps going backwards in terms of inclusion, and that there's a lot of words being said, but not much deeds. And I think something like the Independent Defence Authority would be the enactment of that. We would finally see some action and some change, and that might start moving the dial forward. But at the moment, my view is we do not currently have in action, in actual activity, diversity or inclusion in the armed forces at the moment.
Thank you. David, please.
Yeah, I think the Army has come a long way. In the 13 years I was, you know, a member of the Armed Forces, I'd seen some changes, but I think there is still a long way to go. I think always the hardest thing to change in any organisation is one of culture. And whilst you can put in rules and regulations, they really need to be embedded. And we've seen only this week with local press coverage of issues with hazing and things like that are still going on. And this shows that the issues are still there, and there are massive problems, particularly for Commonwealth soldiers as my chosen speciality today. There are issues with how they're treated, and the fees, removal of the fees would actually be a very good way of sending out a message in that area, that we're very serious on changing these injustices, as I'm sure the other panel members campaigns writing those injustices would as well.
Thank you. And Caroline, please.
Absolutely. The forces have changed dramatically. Both Craig and I served in the armed forces for quite some time before the ban was lifted. And then there was a period where the armed forces had to adjust and realize and make that realization that diversity was a power and become inclusive, and it has. And in the last 10 years or so, the military is significantly better than it was for the veterans that we've been speaking about today. But it's really important that we remember that the military family does include those veterans, and everybody looks at the military and says how good it is, and in a way that damages those veterans, because they see what they've lost, they see what could have been, and nobody's given them the respect that's due. So the military is brilliant, and we're very proud of it. It's not perfect by any means. There are still matters within the military regarding the LGBT plus community that are work in progress. I know that the military is determined to put right all of the things that are still being experienced by service personnel. But yes, it's a much better place.
Thank you. And Craig, please.
To follow on, Fighting with Pride works really closely with the LGBT plus forums in the armed forces. That's Royal Navy Compass, the RAF Freedom Network, and the Army's LGBT plus forum. So we're well connected to folks on the ground, and we know that they feel that they are supported at every level of command. And that's really important. We need people. There will always be incidences where things go wrong. What we need to know is that people feel confident about stepping forward. And we think that that has been one of the achievements of the last 20 years, is that increasingly people feel able to step forward. But that's not a comprehensive blanket, and work still needs to go on, and we need to improve. But what Caroline and I and the team at Fighting with Pride are concerned about is that the situation for LGBT plus veterans is very, very different. And in the 21 years since the lifting of the ban, very, very little has been done for a group of people who frankly deserve